Dante stood tall, lowering his left hand and pointing his right at a cluster of knobs that were trying to direct the other orcs. The sanguinary guard aimed the light, and another Cadian trooper tapped his detonator. The greenskins disintegrated as a pair of buried meltamines detonate, casting a wave of hyperheated air over the dirt, drying out the soil, and reducing the orcs to smoke and ash. Another flick of the wrist saw to the deaths of nearly a dozen Gretchens who had actually been stupid enough to try climbing the canyon walls, as a few concealed Cadian troops opened up with hell guns. With precise, practiced movements, the sappers, snipers, anti-tank troopers, and devastators picked off the packed mass of green. Finally, the dust settled, and the only sound that could be heard was the noise of the orcs blasting away at the crumbling wall of rock. Dante reopened his channel to the men. "Reload!" The hidden guard complied eagerly. "Sir, should we place more mines?" one of the devastators asked quietly. Dante didn't bother to trim his channel down to just the one Marine, directing his response instead to the entire Imperial group. "Place no more mines or bombs, brothers, guardsmen. Rely instead on what we have placed and the forces we have arrayed around the canyon walls." "Acknowledged, Chapter Master," the Devastator said respectfully. Dante nodded. "Good initiative, Marine, but we simply cannot risk a single soldier being caught on the canyon floor when the greenskin filth break the barrier," he said on a tighter signal, beaming at the Devastator specifically. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a huge crack appeared in the rocks. Innumerable dozer blades pushing against tumbled stones, driving them apart. A loud primal yell sounded from the far side as the rocks budged. Dante's lips twisted. Damn, I was hoping we'd get more time. He voxed the troops on the canyon walls while seemingly standing perfectly still for the orcs to shoot. "All units on the far side of the blockade, open fire at will. Retreat the moment you see the greenskins target you. We can afford no losses." "Aye, Lord Dante," the 15th Cadian colonel said at once, his voice coming in clean over the calm. He cut the channel and rose to his knees under the camo blanket, and waved his fingers in 4 tight circles over his head, not wanting to risk more with the orcs only 50 meters below. The other guard units with a bead on the orcs quietly sighted their weapons and took aim at the vehicles pushing the rocks. The colonel pumped his clenched fist twice in the air, then mimed a revolver hammer coming down twice. The Universal Guard signal for "fire at will." The Gar mortar teams opened fire first, then the anti-tank troops, timing their shots to arrive simultaneously on the orc vehicles with true Cadian precision. Just as the first shells hit the backs and tops and flanks of the tightly packed vehicles below, the energy weapon-toting troops opened up, adding their own fire to the fray. It was a slaughter. The orcs had known that there were troops on the canyon walls the moment they had fired on the orcs trapped on the other side, of course, but it apparently hadn't occurred to them that there were soldiers on both sides of the rockfall. The sheets of las beams, rockets, shells, grenades, bolts, napalm, and hyper-energized plasma rained down on the Xenos like a downpour of death, boiling the vehicles and troops away. A sub-boss, probably a recently promoted native nob by the look of him, raised his armored claw in the air and pointed it at the rocks that were still blocking their way, and with surprising speed, the remaining orc vehicles rolled forward, crushing the ruins of their own wrecked vehicles without hesitation. They slammed their dozer blades and armor panels into the rocks with gusto, and finally it was too much for the impromptu blockade to bear. With a rumbling that echoed beyond the canyon walls to the jungles beyond, the green tide broke through. Dante pointed his tense, splayed fingers at the rushing mass of green, with what an onlooker would have mistaken for glee if they didn't know him well, and the third wave of packed explosives detonated. The sanguinary guard captain dutifully swept the beam of light across the hidden charges, maintaining the facade for as long as the orcs were falling for it. The engines here behind him flickered the red and white bulbs on and off with a speed no unaugmented human could match, turning the light into a strobe that would have been blinding had the battle taken place at night. The packs of explosives detonated one at a time, but in very rapid succession, just as Dante had ordered them placed, and the thought crossed his mind that he really should have the Cadian demomen awarded shore leave if they survived. The effect was immediate and intensely satisfying. Now that the orcs were crossing through it in a single packed mass rather than the more scattered vanguard, there was no space for the jostling troops to maneuver. Shockwaves from the blasts toppled orcs far away from the blasts as closer troops were knocked into them, and vehicles flipped over and crushed greenskins that would have escaped harm had they been farther away. Judging the moment right, Dante opened his comm channel to all Imperial forces in the canyon area. "Now is the time. Strike with the Emperor's might, all first wave troops." The troops who had so successfully cut down the first doomed wave of orcs joined their fellows in raining destruction on the greenskins below. The assault marines that had accompanied Dante Both the hidden and the unobscured readied their own weapons, those who had brought something heavier than bolt pistols joining in the carnage with a will. However, even the hundreds of well-concealed Imperial troops couldn't hide forever. Some of the orcs along the canyon wall stopped in their tracks, firing their weapons at the guard who were pouring fire down at them. Dante was afraid that they would retain their positions, but either loyalty or common sense prevailed, and the troops whose positions had been compromised immediately fell back, scrambling away from the edge. None of them seemed to have been hit, miraculously enough, and the colonel ordered them to back away and lob grenades over the edge. None of the grenades managed to reach the canyon floor before detonating, of course, but the bursts of light and shrapnel took their toll on orcs below.